and social justice, as a feminist leader, and as an executive director of the Christic Institute and the Romero Institute for over 35, 40 years. And we're very grateful to have you here today. We were going to be discussing with you today, if you wouldn't mind talking with us about some of your experiences with patriarchy throughout your years as a leader here in America.
It kind of reminds me, when you asked me that question, of something that happened early in my activist feminist life back in the 70s. And it's interesting because it ties together with something I'm doing now. So I'll share that story with you. In the 70s, I was in the National Organization for Women for a whole bunch of reasons, all of which related to my concern about the patriarchal system that we all live in our families, many of our families, and in our government, in our economy, etc. So, and I had been put on the Commission for the Status of Women in California, and from there I was going to a conference in Chicago. I was a reporter. I had a camera. And this was a conference for labor union women to get together for the first time in history in the United States to talk about their needs and problems as women in the labor movement, because there was patriarchy in the labor movement too. And so I went with one camera, and they expected 1,200 women, and they got 3,400 women. They were astonished at how many women came to this conference. And in a period of three or so days, I did capture the spirit of the conference. I interviewed people like, I interviewed a lot of people who were leaders in the feminist movement while I was there. And I also had great shots of all of these 3,400 women clapping, all standing up, cheering, because they were so happy that they were going to be able to talk with one another about just things that were going on in the labor movement that were interfering with their ability to provide leadership, to be part of decision-making processes, there was always at that time in the 70s the idea that most men had, that the women were supposed to be delivering coffee, going out and buying food, and cleaning up after everybody, and they were not really looked upon as equal players in whatever strategic activities were going on. And so anyway, I did capture this and edited it with my friends and took it to the East Coast to see if I could raise the money to turn it into a film. I videotaped it, but at that time most people didn't have video players in their houses. So I thought I should turn it into a film. Long and short of it is, because I was showing it all over the East Coast, the National Organization for Women wrote to me and asked me if I would become the labor coordinator for NOW, for the action programs in NOW. And I said yes. And I started a collective of 9 women, and we were all working on different components. One woman was working with clerical workers to help them understand what they could do if they were part of bargaining agreements, collective bargaining agreements. They could bargain for better wages, because women's wages were so much lower than men's, and they could correct some of those things if they were in unions. So we were helping to spread the word that union contracts would really help women deal with the economic disparities that were going on between their wages and men's wages, and the health and safety issues. The fact that they were not even covered by some of the insurance that you could deal with that sometimes in a collective bargaining agreement. So anyway, we had 9 different projects in our team, and then along came the Karen Silkwood case, and I was asked if we would address this issue, because Karen Silkwood was a whistleblower working at a plutonium factory in Oklahoma. And she realized, she was on the union team, And she was responsible for health and safety because she had been good at science when she was in high school, and she was aware that there were real dangers with exposure to radiation. All the other workers didn't know that, and she kept trying to explain it to them. And then she became really aware that there were dangers not only to the workers but also to the public, because there were many ways in which the area around the plant was getting contaminated. They were putting contaminated waters and stuff into the river, and then the next morning there'd be hundreds and hundreds of dead fish, and then they would scoop them out of the river before anyone saw them. They would take contaminated trucks and wash them at the regular car wash, and all the plutonium, which is it's lethal for about 250 years. The half-life of plutonium is 250,000 years, and so it's very dangerous. It doesn't take much at all to give you cancer. And so putting it into the car wash and putting it into the regular water system was really alarming to her. So she began working with the national labor leaders in her union, the Oil, Chemical, and Atomic Workers Union, and she was gathering the evidence of the hazards, and she was going to deliver them to a New York Times reporter, and one of the national union people was with that reporter. And on her way to that meeting, she was run off the road. She was killed. All of her documents disappeared from the car. And in the 2 weeks previous to that, her home had been contaminated with plutonium, including food in her refrigerator. And so there was a huge mystery here of what happened to this woman. And it was on national television. There was a New York Times reporter involved. And we began, an investigation. Now, under my leadership, the Labor Task Force have now decided, okay, we're going to do our best to get a congressional investigation and find out what happened to her. We have to know what happened to her. And so we mobilized throughout the country, because we had chapters all over the country. Almost every small town now had a chapter. There were thousands of women involved in these chapters. And so in August, there's a day, Women Against Violence Against Women's Day. Every year we would have events through all the parks in all the small towns and all the cities. We would have actions in the cities, and we would focus on certain issues where there'd been violence against women. And so I asked all the chapters and all of the activities to include Silkwood, and raised the question of whether or not, how this happened to her. And so the Now women would have tables in the park, and they would have they would have paper and pens, and everyone was writing letters to their Congress people, to particularly a senator and some Congress people, saying, I want you to do congressional investigations into what happened to Karen Silkwood. Somebody killed her, we think, and we need to know. And they would sign it, and then they would write down the address and send it. So this resulted in thousands and thousands of letters going to Congress. And what we heard on the Hill was that the men, mostly the men at that time, very few women on the Hill. Bella Abzug, I believe, was one elected woman. She was fantastic. But for the most part, it was all male. Beyond that, a few women. And we heard that they were flabbergasted because all of these letters were pouring in from all over the United States, saying that women wanted a congressional investigation of what happened to Karen Silkwood. And so then, through a series of processes and a lot of press and what have you, we did get that. And there was a great investigation with a wonderful investigator, and there were 2 hearings that happened in the House of Representatives, and one of them ended up on the front cover of Time magazine because of the explosive information that came out in that hearing about what happened to Karen, but also about FBI and CIA informant who was right in the middle of this thing somehow, and got exposed in the course of the investigation. The point is that all of this ended up resulting in a situation where we went to trial. We had a huge lawsuit after the 2 congressional hearings We recruited and got the assistance of a great lawyer who put together a whole lawsuit and a great investigation. We went to trial in Oklahoma in 1979 after weeks of trial, one of the longest trials. We won, and the biggest judgment ever against at that time against a corporation because of their contamination of her and of the workers and of the public. And as a result of that, no more private nuclear power plants were built after that, because they were too dangerous. Because what we were able to demonstrate in the course of this case is that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and the Atomic Energy Commission were not telling the people the truth. Their standards for how much radiation would be dangerous were way off base, and so people were getting contaminated and didn't even know it. So it was an exposure of the limitations and the cover-up by government agencies that were supposed to be protecting the public, but they were really in league with the corporation. And the corporation and these agencies were working together and at the expense of American citizens, workers, the public around these plants, etc. And that all got exposed in that project and became a huge effort with a big alliance of organizations and many musicians like Jackson Browne and Bonnie Raitt and Crosby, Stills and Nash, and eventually we were helped by Bruce Springsteen later in another case, but where they would have concerts to raise money to help us and also to spread the word. So this is an example of how social activism can be very effective and have an impact. It can change the laws, can change people's consciousness because they become exposed to the truth and the facts, because you're doing serious investigation to find out what the truth is.